and welcome to this episode of Decoding Data Analytics. And I'll be your host for the show, Jahanvee Narang, currently working as a data analyst. Hi, Douglas. Welcome to the podcast. This podcast is all about analytics from the perspective of global data professionals. And for our viewers today, we have Douglas Laney. He's the Data and Analytics Strategy Innovation Fellow with the consultancy West Monroe. Formerly, he was the Vice President and Distinguished Analyst with Gartner's Chief Data Officer Research. He's the three-time recipient of Gartner's Annual Thought Leadership Award and is also regularly considered as one of the top global influencers around these topics. He was the one who in 2001 coined the term three V's: volume, velocity, and variety, which is now commonly defined as big data and is used across all the companies. And also, 2 decades ago, he was the one who originated the field of Infonomics, and he was the author of the book Infonomics: Monetizing and Managing Information as a Competitive Advantage for All the Companies in These Days. He not only writes these amazing books, but he's also a co-author at Forbes as well. And recently, he also published an amazing article, Forbes this week as well, which I read, and it was really, really amazing. He also edited and co-authored the Forbes ebook on big data. And this year, he actually written an amazing, amazing book, which I am in love with. And it's totally amazing for anyone who's starting their journey in data analytics, data science, or anyone who's a data professional. This book is named Data Juice, which is 100 stories on how companies are squeezing data and using it for data monetization, using it as a competitive advantage, and pulling out all the analytic strategies, which is already there in the data. So, yeah, welcome to the podcast, Douglas.
Thank you, Jahanvee. Pleasure to be with you today.
Great. Would love to know a bit about yourself and your journey so far.
Well, let's see. Like you said, I was a longtime Gartner analyst. So I guess for most of my career, I was a senior analyst with Gartner, advising organizations around the world on data and analytics strategy and best practices. Did that for over a decade. Prior to that, I've been in the software industry for a while in the expert systems world, with one of the pioneering data warehouse companies running professional services. What started my career in I guess this will date me, in the Big Eight, back with Arthur Andersen before it was Andersen Consulting, and then before it was Accenture. So that's pretty much my career journey. After publishing Infonomics, I was really interested in kind of putting those ideas into practice, and joining a consultancy. And I had known about West Monroe for a while through my advisory work at Gartner, and really got to appreciate the value and the cultures and the capability, and the people at West Monroe. And they took an interest in the concept of Infonomics, on how to manage and monetize and measure data as an actual corporate asset and make that part of their services portfolio. So it was a good marriage.
Wow, that's totally amazing. Would love to know more about the book Data Juice and how exactly, you got the idea.
Yeah, so when I was at Gartner, they said, well, since you're the guy who defined what big data is, you mentioned the three V's of volume, velocity, and variety. They said, well, okay, so you're going to cover big data as a topic at Gartner. Okay, so I was sort of designated the big data analyst at Gartner, as I was saying, and the questions from clients evolved from what is big data to how do we do big data to, now that we have all of this big data, what do we do with this data to generate value? So I started collecting stories on how organizations are using data and analytics in innovative and high value ways. And this library of stories became hundreds of stories. And eventually I decided to put them into a book. People felt that they were inspired by or shamed into doing more with their data by these stories. There were a number of stories in my first book in Infonomics, and folks wanted more stories. Now, the other thing that's part of the Data Juice book is it's not just the stories, but I involve dozens of colleagues and others throughout the industry, from chief data officers to other consultants to thought leaders and practitioners, to provide a commentary on each of the stories. So each of the stories includes kind of an analysis from one of dozens of different experts around the world. So I think that the stories themselves are interesting, but the analyses and the commentary are even much more instructive.
Definitely, this was one of the part which I really liked. Even I went through the book and I've almost completed half of it. And it's really insightful because these data is the stories are not even just backed by what XYZ company has implemented, but you have actually mentioned the the factual company name. So it's not like
Hmm.
it's a dummy company which might have implemented or which could have implemented it. You have given an example of
Hmm.
actual company who has actually implemented something, and then you have actually provided the results. There's a
Yeah.
CDO, there is a CTO, which are actually providing their inputs on how what they feel about the particular process, how exactly
Hmm. Hmm.
analytics can be applied in retail, how it can be applied in finance, and there's so much more
Right.
depth being provided, which is not been available, before in any
Yeah,
of the
that
book.
was really important to me to include real world stories from named companies and organizations. There are a lot of suspect stories that vendors, I think, publish without naming the customers or the clients. And I wanted these stories to all be validated. So, yeah.
Yeah, that was really amazing because now as a professional, I can see, okay, this company has actually
Mhm.
implemented this strategy and they have seen this
Mhm.
results. So maybe if I implemented something similar, maybe I would have also seen results because there's so
Right.
much noise around,
Mhm.
the data analytics, data science. Thousands of courses are coming up, thousands of
Mhm.
books are coming up, but nothing,
Right.
actually mentioned the particular
Mhm.
company, especially, 101 stories with actual
Right.
101 companies backed by all the data
Mhm.
professionals which had the thought
Mhm.
leadership involved.
But people always ask me, what are others in my industry doing? And so in the book, you can look up by industry what other organizations are doing. But I think it's also important to look at other industries. Why do you want to be in second place or third place? Why not look at what
Yeah.
organizations in other industries are doing with data and analytics and perhaps be the first one or one of the first in your own industry to do that. So I've provided a guide or an index to the type of story, whether it's a story related to customer data or related to customer experience or process improvement or supply chain or whatever. So you can kind of search for stories, and I also included hashtags for those who are downloading the book as an ebook. You can search on hashtags to kind of find the topics that are of interest to you.
Yeah, that was, really amazing. I really like this one inference in the book that the more you process the data, the more expensive and exclusive they become. Just like how
Hmm.
wheat itself, is a commodity. It's really inexpensive,
Right.
but when it's actually processed into, different kinds of flours,
Mhm.
it became bread. It's used in pizza. It's used in sandwiches, cakes. Then it became very premium. You can
Hmm.
add extra value, exclusivity to, provide and then sell
Hmm.
it off, and that's how that relationship was like really mind blowing when you actually think
Yeah,
about it.
it's an interesting economic concept that applies to really almost any kind of resource or asset, which is the more you process it, the more potentially valuable it becomes for particular use cases, but the less generally applicable it may become. So organizations kind of have to decide how much are they going to process their data before it becomes consumed, um, or analyzed. And especially this is true in the data monetization world, where companies are selling or licensing their data. How much should they process it beforehand, to either broaden the market or increase the premium that organizations will pay for that asset? The good news about data is it's a what we call a non-rivalrous, non-depleting asset, which means that you can process it multiple ways simultaneously and use it multiple ways over and over again without it depleting. So in that way, data potentially is even more valuable than we say oil, which doesn't have any of those characteristics. A lot of people call data the new oil, but it really misses the point that data has these unique economic characteristics that oil doesn't have.
Yeah, I know you have mentioned a lot of case studies in the book, but would love to know if you can provide a use case of how exactly the processing of data works and how exactly it can impact a company or an
Mhm.
organization or even a small team.
Individuals. But there, are a number of stories in there on how organizations have used data to grow their business, to reduce risks, to improve supply chains, to improve forecasting. So a lot of great stories in there from most industries.
Yeah, definitely. In the introduction of the book, you mentioned that, data monetization, whether you name it digitization, whether you name data-driven business,
Mhm.
business intelligence, or just analytics, whatever you name it, it just boils down to creating new sources of value from data. So,
Mhm.
what advice would you give to a data professional? How actually they can, create new sources from the data?
It's really limited by your imagination and creativity. So we provide our clients with workshops at West Monroe, where we go in and run these workshops. We're exploring the range of data that they have, a variety of use cases from inside and outside their industry that might be inspirational or lead to new ideas for them. We explore the business drivers of different aspects of their business, and also the business drivers of external entities throughout their what we call their extended business ecosystem. Their suppliers, their partners suppliers, their partners' customers, their customers' partners, and so forth, even including industry organizations and hedge funds and investors, who might find some of this data valuable and how they might use it. So when we talk about data monetization, which is really what the book is about, we're not necessarily talking about selling data, but making data available internally or externally to drive new value streams. So the workshops that we do generate those ideas, and then we run those ideas through kind of a feasibility assessment, where we're looking at their cost, their economic feasibility, their practicality. Are they organizationally feasible? Are they scalable? Are they legal? Are they ethical? And then we kind of see which of the ideas bubble to the top.
Yeah. When you talk about monetization internally or externally, what are the streams through which, organization can, do internally monetize the data and externally monetize the data? Like, what are those streams?
Using data for either operational excellence to improve an operation or improve strategy, typically decision making, or make data just available as an asset that you're selling, or insights available as an asset that you're selling or licensing to others. So the data streams can take a variety of forms, both internal and external. We've identified, I think, a dozen different ways, different kinds of value streams for data.
Okay.
Mhm.
So data analytics stories are, really hard to find, and you can't actually rely on, Kaggle data projects you have written,
Right.
these amazing stories. So from your
Mhm.
standpoint, what is that one framework which can turn, a normal data into dollars?
I don't know that there's one framework. I mean, again, it requires an assessment of the data that you have available. What would happen if you integrated that data? We look at involving external data sources and integrating those to make your data more valuable. We look at the needs and wants of various internal and external stakeholders. We do hypothesis generating. And from that, we identify new ways to leverage data and analytics. So I don't think there's really one framework. I guess it's an overall approach that we do offer.
Do you think taking third-party data is a great way to leverage your own first-party data?
Yeah, absolutely. Many organizations are kind of just stare at their own navel, their own belly button when it comes to data. And I think it's really important to look outside as well, especially in the early days of the pandemic, as I wrote about in a Forbes article. Companies had to very quickly shift from trend-based analysis to more driver-based analysis, because their forecasts were broken by the pandemic and the changes in the issues of the supply chain and so forth, and demand. And so just relying on their own historical data to do forecasting was not feasible anymore. So they had to look at external drivers of demand and supply in order to make their own in order to improve their forecasting models. Right.
Ranking and all of that. So, according to you, what are few third-party resources which an organization can look out for?
Well, they should, I guess, primarily be looking at partner data. So who are their partners, their supply chain partners, or their selling partners? They might look also for data from open data sources. There are tens of millions of data sources published by government organizations and NGOs and even businesses themselves because of regulations they have to do so. There is data from social media. There's data that you can gather from harvesting web content, from scraping web content. So all of that can be extremely valuable, particularly when integrated with your own data. But there are even companies who have created new business models in selling data and insights simply using external data, not even their own internal data.
Is it beneficial for the startups who are just getting started, or is it great for MNCs as well?
Yeah, startups have a difficult time with often generating investment. And one of the things that they might be able to trade for is the data that they have. So if they've already started kind of collecting or generating data, but they're not very cash rich and they're looking for loans or investments, they can actually increasingly turn to investment opportunities or lending opportunities by holding up their data as collateral.
Oh.
Yeah.
Wow, that's totally insightful. Moving on to the next question, things look good really on paper, reading about strategies and framework, like there's so much content available. There are CDOs and, data leaders which are being reading and consuming this content. And they already are aware about, so many data which is already available internally and, as you mentioned, the third party as well. But where do you think there is a roadblock which, companies hold back and they're not able to implement that in real world?
One of the roadblocks we often hear about is the inability to leverage customer data because of privacy regulations. And while it's true that you can't exchange personally identifiable information because of, in Europe and GDPR and in other countries, various privacy regulations, it really, considering that an entire roadblock really is an indication that a company is not being very creative. So one of the ways that you can kind of get around that issue is by, rather than me selling you my data, I sell your services and goods to my customers. And in that way, I'm not exposing who they are, but I'm monetizing my customer data in a new way, again, without having to share who they are. So we refer to that as inverted data monetization. So a lot of it just has to do with being really creative about the ways that you're leveraging data and analytics. But other roadblocks are cultural, they're political, they're a lack of data literacy in organizations, inability to change. So change management is an issue. And then many organizations tend to be singularly focused on their own core business and not really think about the opportunities of generating new value streams or revenue streams from their data assets, because that's not their core business. They're like, well, we're not a data broker. That's not a business that we want to be in. And that may be a bit short-sighted.
And what's your one advice to these companies so that they can overcome that roadblock and proceed to actually consuming the content and the data in a fullest form?
I've been talking for a while about data as an asset, and if you're going to consider something an asset, it makes sense to measure its value. So with a number of our clients, we're helping them measure the economic value or the financial value of their data assets, both as they are leveraged today, but also the potential economic value of their data assets. So they can look at that gap between the realized and the potential value of their data. They can also look at the cost side of their data and to try to grow this helps them think about how to grow the margin on their data. So treating it as a real economic or financial asset and doing the kinds of measurements and value analyses that you do with your other assets, I think is something that helps move a lot of organizations forward with deploying their data in new and innovative ways.
Okay. You mentioned that, measuring the quality of the data and looking at the future value. Now, how can actually, one measure the data quality for the futuristic value? If you have to measure marketing, there is conversion rate.
Yeah.
If you have to look the, futuristic perspective of your customer, you can look at the customer lifetime value where you can, predict, how much revenue a customer can bring in for their entire lifetime in future. But how an organization can look that in data?
Yeah. Well, if we're talking just about data quality, there are a variety of data quality characteristics that we we help organizations measure, and that's things like the accuracy, completeness, scale, timeliness, availability, precision, and then some subjective indicators of data quality like believability and clarity and so forth. So there are about a dozen different data quality metrics that an organization can consider. Those are all kind of indicators of data's potential value. Now, if you're looking at data's actual value, you can look at its cost basis. What did it cost you to create and generate and store and secure and overall manage that data asset? And then you can look at, just as you would with any asset, you can look at its a contribution to revenue. You can look at its ability to generate revenue by selling it or licensing it. It's what its market value is, and then you can kind of throw some of those in the numerator and denominator to get a data asset's net asset value, its NAV, by looking at its cost basis and also the value that it's generating. Now, a lot of times we're also looking at the potential economic value of a data asset. So we have to go through that exercise of coming up with ideas and then assessing their economic value and feasibility, maybe a probability that those ideas will actually see the light of day. So we have models for all of this that can help a company estimate the value of data today, but also the value of their data in the future based on a number of prospective use cases.
Wow, wow, that's amazing. Moving ahead, in the book, you also mentioned that, many organizations find a particular use case for the data they have collected. They used it for the single purpose and then they, just archive it, and that you
Right.
regard it as a dark data.
Dark data.
So,
Yeah.
how would you, recommend companies or as a data professional to think from a 360 point of view where they can understand, okay, this can be applied here, but, there are other areas as well which this can be implemented.
Yeah, it really takes some sitting down and thinking and running some workshops and ideating about the data. What are new ways that we can deploy this data that we're maybe only using for a single purpose? I mean, a really interesting examples would be in the insurance industry, how some insurers have realized that the investigation reports, when somebody submits a claim, investigators will investigate that claim. And those investigation reports are used to process that claim, but they can also be analyzed en masse to identify leading indicators or indicators of fraud. What kinds of language or omissions, are indicative of fraud? But it takes a large library, a large stack of those investigation reports to do that. So that's just one example of how companies have leveraged dark data to generate new value streams.
Yeah, but you have coined like a really great term, dark data, because I've seen this personally as well. Yeah, if marketing is collecting one data, they'll use it for one use case and then they'll dump it.
Right.
There would be another team which had a personal data and they'll use it for some specific purpose, and it would be.
Yeah, in awareness, but also in kind of an inability to change, a lack of data literacy and understanding data as an actual asset or economic resource. Those are and architecturally, a lot of data still exists in silos or is stuck inside source systems and not brought into a data warehouse or a data lake where it's more generally available. And even if it is available, people maybe don't trust it because they haven't done any kind of data quality analysis on it. People don't know how far they can trust data because they don't know its accuracy or completeness or timeliness. And so it's important to measure those things and put the data quality indicators on the data, in the whatever kind of metadata tool or catalog you're using.
Yeah, no, that's true. So, what's one advice you would like to give back to, the data professionals in the early stages when you were working as an analyst at Gartner? So, if you go back then, what advice would you like to, give back to you or, any budding data professional like me who has just been in this industry for about like 2 to 5 years?
I would say don't get stuck in your career building dashboards and scorecards. Doing that kind of hindsight-oriented descriptive analytics doesn't really add a lot of value to the business. Yes, it's the kind of stuff that executives will ask for because they don't know any better, right? They don't understand the art of the possible with data. They don't understand how data can be used to do more predictive or prescriptive or diagnostic kind of analytics. And so I think it's really important for any data analyst to understand those increasing levels of analytic sophistication and value, and be able to articulate their value and create prototypes and examples for executives that go well beyond just the kind of the tired old dashboards. Nobody ever really generated a lot of value from creating pretty pie charts or dashing dashboards. And in fact, in the 101 stories in the Data Juice book, almost none of them have anything to do with that kind of hindsight-oriented analytics.
Yeah. But if you look at, the designation, if you say analyst or if you say analytics, mostly it's considered as the pre-notion part before, a data science gets to create models and,
Yes,
build machine learning algorithm and then deploy it. And then it's the
right.
role of the machine learning engineer, to maintain and, do all the deployment. So where
Mhm.
exactly, analytics comes into the designation of analyst, data engineer, data scientist, machine learning engineer, and all of these pipeline.
I don't know where it actually comes in, but certainly data analysts should, if they're interested in that kind of work, should thrive to learn new tools, new analytic techniques, new statistical techniques to become data scientists. That would be obviously very good for their career. I also think a good data scientist is one who can kind of communicate and tell stories as well, not just crunch numbers. And so if you really want to augment your career as a data analyst, learn how to do that storytelling, how to communicate data and insights in a way that is consumable by those who are not data savvy or data literate. And that will take you a long way in your career.
Okay. So one should never limit themselves to just creating dashboards and, just processing normal queries,
Yeah.
and upskill themselves to prescriptive, descriptive,
Yeah.
further
I mean,
analytics and
I'm not telling anyone
yeah.
what to do with their career, but if they really want to advance, and make more money and be more in demand and higher value to their organization, then yes.
Wow, that's totally
Mhm.
amazing.
Yeah.
You must have seen given so many advices, thrown on LinkedIn and
Mhm.
Twitter related to data. What's one advice you would ask people to not listen to and avoid?
I think there are a lot of trends and bright shiny objects that people get too attached to. Like one right now is this concept of the data mesh, right, as an alternative to data warehouses or data lakes. And the idea
Yeah.
of virtually integrating data is very attractive on its surface, but it comes with a very large performance implications, right? Um, Lack of historical data, lack of ability to integrate data very quickly, query performance. There are a lot of issues with the data mesh kind of concept as it's been articulated. Yes, there are going to be use cases where it makes sense to integrate source system data for occasional kinds of queries or lookups, but not for high performance analysis. So I would just caution people about getting too attached to these bright shiny objects that crop up every once in a while, and be architecturally aware of the implications of new ideas.
Yeah, I guess semantic layer and data mesh was two data jargons which just revolved around in 2022, and everyone
Right.
was talking about it. Everyone just wants to experiment. Like
Yeah.
once new industry pops in, everyone wants just to,
Mhm.
adopt that. Do you think that's a great practice
Right.
for organization?
Yeah, I agree. I would avoid getting attached to one technology. The technologies change even more often than the architectures do. So understand the theory behind data and analytics, and understand the quality and performance implications, the security implications, the privacy implications of any kind of new solution.
Yeah. A question back, you recommended that, data professionals should focus on upskilling themselves with predictive and prescriptive analytics.
Mhm.
So what kind of case studies they should, focus on? This is a personal question because I am also a data professional, a data
Right.
analyst, and most of my job revolves around, creating dashboard, writing queries, cleaning the
Mhm.
data. So personally, this is one of the question which I want to know.
Um, yeah, I mean, that's another use for the Data Juice book is just be inspired by all these, more advanced analytics kinds of use cases. So yeah, and there are plenty of other stories out there published in the press and again by vendors and organizations. So I think it's incumbent upon somebody who really wants to advance in their career in the world of analytics to be heads up to news stories as they're published.
Wow. Yeah. And I recently read your Forbes article as well. It was really amazing. Looking
Thank you.
forward to more such articles.
Thank you. I'll keep them coming. Appreciate it.
And
And keep an eye on Chief Data Officer Magazine as well, CDO Magazine. It's got a lot of good articles, a lot of good articles published by Dataversity and and the TDWI. So, yeah.
wow, that's amazing. One last question for the podcast, and that
Mhm.
is, apart from your books which you have written, Infonomics and Data Juice, what are your
Right.
book recommendations for data professionals?
Um, wow, there's so many out there. Some of my kind of go-to books are from authors like Randy Bean, published a book called Fail Fast and Learn Faster, um, which deals with using analytics in high-value ways. Couple of fun reads by Chris Surdak. One of them is called Data Crush. John Ladley has published a couple of seminal books on data governance and enterprise information management. Tom Redman is a great author on things related to becoming data driven, and he's also authored on data quality. Danette McGilvray has a book on executing data quality projects, which is a great kind of cookbook on how to do so. Bill Schmarzo kind of followed up my Infonomics book with a book of his own on the economics of data. And then there are a number of books by Tom Davenport and his co-author, Gene Harris, Competing on Analytics, and other books that they've written, which have a lot of good inspirational stories in them as well.
Wow. And is there any blog or article which you really refer? Because these days, people prefer, bite-sized information, whether it's newsletter, articles, blogs. So, is
Well,
there any
there's your
particular?
podcast. There are a number of other great podcasts out there. West Monroe has a new podcast called Being Digital, and so I would definitely recommend that as well. And yeah, and then as I mentioned, a lot of great articles from Dataversity and TDWI and Chief Data Officer Magazine. So
Wow, these are
that's what
really
I would.
insightful and amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. It was really an insightful episode. Before you leave, would love to know, is there any specific story which you really like from Data Juice, which you recommend everyone to, just give it a read?
I don't know, but there's a story. I think I maybe I talked about it in Infonomics, but it's a story from Walmart. So Walmart um, had a great search engine, and it was taking into account tens of millions of searches per month, and it was helping people find what they're looking for online. But one week they realized there was a search term that was resulting in a very high degree of shopping cart abandonment. The search term was the word house, and it was taking people to housing goods and housewares and dog houses and doll houses. It wasn't at all what people were looking for. And when they investigated it, somebody realized that the search coincided with the season premiere of a particular television series, the series House. It's a medical drama. And so what they realized was people were looking for the box DVD set or the ability to stream previous seasons of that show. And so they realized that their search engine was only taking into account its own data. Remember, we talked about the value of external data. And so that their search engine wasn't paying attention at all to what was trending in the world at the time. And so when they upgraded the search engine to incorporate social media trends, they ended up reducing shopping cart abandonment by about 10 to 15% across the board. And in Walmart terms,
Wow.
that's like $1 billion a year of additional revenue. So
Yeah.
great example of using more advanced analytics and incorporating external data to drive value.
Wow. This was really an insightful episode. Thank you so much, Douglas, for sharing such an insightful information in this episode.
Thank you, Jahanvee. Really appreciate the time to be with you.